So this lecture is on doing argument. What do I mean by that? I guess what I mean by doing argument is, what do we who are studying argument, students or scholars or academics, like argumentarians, right? Like, what do we do? Well, we try to figure out what's going on here. We want to be able to describe arguments, evaluate arguments, and engage in arguments. That's really what this class is all about. And in order to do argument, then, we really need to understand how to refine arguments. And refining arguments begins with understanding claims. We've already talked about this in other lectures, and I think that's important. Okay, we've got a starter definition here of argument. That an argument is a verbal act in which a claim is supported by reasons within a setting. That's an argument. Okay, and we've already had an entire lecture devoted to all four of these concepts. And if you haven't already watched, or you are a little bit shaky on the lecture that has to do with claims, I really would like to see you go back and check that out again, because I think that if you don't really have a solid foundation, then you're going to struggle a little bit with this particular lecture. But that's the beauty of having the class online and digitally in front of you. Right. So, all right. Now, before we get too deep into this breaking down this notion of claim, because you already have that foundation, I want to start by what we're doing when we're refining arguments. What does that mean? You've probably heard me use that word a number of times. Now I'm going to be really as clear as I possibly can about what I mean by refining an argument. Arguments appear in texts, right? Okay, speeches, testimonies before Congress, billboards, right? Okay, pamphlets, books, movies, documentary films, texts, some kind of collection of words and sentences and symbols, right? Something that has an argument in it on some level. Not all texts are arguments, but all arguments appear in the form of texts. Now, you should be familiar with these three folks, too, or at least these three roles. Keep in mind, right, okay, that our interlocutor and our audience member, these can be the same person, all right? But these folks here, okay, these folks can never be the same person, okay? What you have in this equation, what you have when you're talking about arguments, is you have the person who is making the argument, right? That's the first person, the person who is making the argument. Then you have the person to whom that argument is being made, the interlocutor, right? The arguer is responding to the objections of the interlocutor. The interlocutor is the one who is refusing to accept without good reason the claim advanced by the arguer, okay? So, pro, con, nice simple way of thinking about it. Now, it could be that our interlocutor is trying to influence our audience member, or excuse me, it could be that our arguer is trying to influence our audience member, right? That the interlocutor and the audience are the same person. The audience member is trying to convince the audience member of something. Or it could be like in a debate, right? Where maybe you're watching, Hillary Clinton debating Donald Trump, right? Or Al Gore debating Ross Perot, something like that. You're watching a debate, and the audience member sits outside the argument looking in. The audience, and what makes them the audience, is that they are the ones who may have their thoughts, feelings, and actions modified by the argument, right? Okay, if the arguer is successful, then it is the audience who changes what they think, what they feel, and what it is that they're doing. That's what makes them different. But audience is much broader than that. Audience, this is wrong for all audiences, by their very nature, have to understand what it is that they're being persuaded of. They have to interpret it. It means they're also capable of misinterpreting or misunderstanding those things, right? But what makes audiences audiences is that they must interpret the arguments, right, and come to some sort of conclusion about them. That means that as audience members, right, okay, that's what we're doing. Now, we, in this class, we are members of the audience. This doesn't just include people who are sitting there passively watching the debates on television. It also includes those of us who are studying and trying to understand argument. We, us, we are part of this audience, right? And what we are is we are critics. That's what we are. We are the critics of argument. We refine arguments so that we can understand them, so that we can evaluate them, which puts us in better position to engage in argumentation in whatever the particular sphere that we're talking about is, right? So, a refined argument is a text that's been interpreted by a critic. right? And a refined text has been interpreted, refined by a critic, so that all of the stuff that we're not interested in, right? Like refining oil is about getting rid of all of the garbage stuff that we don't want, so we can just get the gasoline or the diesel that we use in our cars and trucks, right? That's how we refine gasoline. Well, when we refine a text, we're getting rid of all of that rhetoric, all of that sophistry, all of that kind of clutter that makes up a text, so we can just get at what we want, which is the argument part, right? That is something that we interpret from the text. It's not something that the text does for us. It's something that we do to the text as part of our analysis of it. A refined argument is the text plus the audience member, us, the critic, who is refining it. That's where the refined argument comes from. So when we're looking at a text and we're trying to identify the claim, right? The subject term is or are good or bad, right? You know, nuclear weapons are bad, right? Okay, when we're looking at that, that's our tendency. What's in our head, right? Like our default setting is to assume that the arguer is the one who decides what the claim is. Okay, but I'm going to tell you something. Arguers sometimes are bad. Sometimes they're untrustworthy. Sometimes they're sophists. Sometimes they're just bozos, right? Okay, no. Identifying the claim is something that we as audience members do, right? We look at it and say, he may think he's talking about this over here, but the subject of this essay is this, and this person is clearly trying to influence us to believe that that is bad, right? Nuclear weapons are bad. That's what the audience member's role is, right? That's what we're doing. We're not relying on arguers to tell us what their claims are. We're looking at arguments and saying, this is the claim. So don't look for it to kind of go through and underline it or circle it and pull it out of the text and be like, of all of the sentences, I think this is the most important one. You make the sentence. You say this is what the claim is. Subject term is or are, good or bad is your predicate term. There you go, right? Because refining arguments is an analytical activity. It's an analytical activity. That is, we're using what we know about arguments, that knowledge that we grow, that stuff that we learn every day. We're using that knowledge in order to better understand what's happening in front of us, in order to better answer that question here, what's going on. The more we know about arguments in an abstract, theoretical, general kind of way, the better positioned we are to describe actual arguments in the world, the better we are to evaluate and discriminate between conflicting arguments in the world, and the better positioned we are to actually engage in those arguments in the world. We take what we know about something in a theoretical, general, abstract kind of way, and we apply it to the actual real thing there that's sitting in front of us. What is it that we know about arguments generally that can explain what's happening in this particular text in front of us specifically? The more you know, the better you are at refining arguments, right? See, and this may help you to understand, I think, part of what I'm getting at here too, right? Description. When I tell you I want you to describe something, or when you're asked to describe a thing, what you're doing is you're applying a theory to it on some level, right? Okay? This is what makes this is what makes descriptions fundamentally different from mere summaries, right? A summary, like a Cliff Notes, a thumbnail version of a text, right? What that does is it takes a big thing and makes it smaller, right? Okay? All right? A summary of the movie is never as much as the movie itself. Okay? The Cliff Notes version of the book is never as big as the book itself, right? If the Cliff Notes were bigger, why would you read them? That's why you read Cliff Notes, right? Okay? That's the idea. The trailer can never be as big as the whole movie. Paraphrase, same thing. Taking something that someone else has said and then just putting it into your own words. Well, that may show that you understand it, that you get it. Certainly that's a tool that we as teachers use to see how well you understand things. But when you're paraphrasing something, you're not making it bigger. And in fact, you're usually taking something away. You're making it smaller. Analysis begins at the level of description. All analysis begins with description, and what makes description description and not a mere summary, okay, is that it's asking itself, right? Not just how to reduce it, not how to make it smaller and fit it, into a 9.5 by 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper to turn into your teacher. It's asking the Geertzian question. It's asking Clifford Geert's driving question, right? What's going on? What's happening inside this text? And in order to answer that, what it does is it applies some theory. And that means that description is fundamentally different from summarizing, fundamentally different from paraphrasing, because what it does is it expands upon. Description adds to. It keeps moving. It makes the text bigger by adding to it. It doesn't make it smaller by taking it away and making it easier to digest. That is the nature of analytical activities. They build on and expand, not just reduce and make smaller. So understanding the claim. Understanding the claim is something that you, as the argument critic, are doing. You look at a text and you say, this is what I think this text's claim is. And if I disagree with you, or if one of your peers disagrees with you, or a stranger on the street disagrees with you, we can look at it and say, here, this is why I think this is the claim. I may respond back. We may disagree. We may argue back and forth. But you are now engaged in the argument by asserting and then backing up. Here's what I think the claim is. It's something that you do to the text. Now, if you have to go to the restroom, this is a good time to do it. You can hit pause. We can come back, right? Because we're going to change gears here a little bit. This really is a reminder of what you ought to be carrying forward from the last lecture that you had about claims, and we defined them earlier on in the course, right? So what is a claim? Well, a claim is a single declarative sentence. That's what a claim is. A claim is a single declarative sentence, right? Single because otherwise it would be claims and not a claim, right? And a declarative sentence because it's a statement that has a t-value, a truth value. It's not a question, it's not a command, it's not an interrogation, it's not an imposition, right? Or impellation, right? It is a declarative sentence. It says something about the world, right? Not only does it have a truth value, but because we're talking about argumentative claims or claims that we can argue, we're also not talking about facts that we go out and verify. We're talking about things that are probable but not certain. Things about the future, things about the past, things about values, things of that nature. We've talked about all of this stuff before in another lecture. When we refine an argument, we want to get rid of a lot of the clutter. We want to reduce a lot of the unnecessary words. We want to express claims in their simplest possible form, which is always subject, term, copular verb, and by copular verb we always mean is or are, only is or are. We could do past tense, was or were, but we're talking about the copular here, and so it's subject term, copular verb, predicate term. That's the simplest way to express any claim, and that's how we want to express it when we're refining an argument. The author probably will not. The arguer who produced the text will probably not express their claim in the simplest possible form, but we who want to understand it, we want to keep it simple. So we are going to express their claim, what we believe their thesis to be, in the simplest possible form. So we got that. Weapons of mass destruction are bad, right? Okay, I got a subject term. I'm talking about a thing out there that I read about, and yeah, I've got a copular verb, is or are, and I've got bad, right? Okay, copular verb, subject term, copular verb, predicate term. I've got my three components there, right? Okay, very good. Now, okay, again, this is something that I got. I read the essay, I read the text, and I said, this is what the author's talking about. I put a copular verb in there, and then I said, good thing or bad thing, right? Okay, nuclear weapons are bad. Very good. Now, I want to start getting even a little bit more precise, right? We built our foundation, okay? We learned how to ride our bike. Now it's time to learn how to pop a wheelie, okay? All right? First, yeah, this is it. Subject term, predicate term, copular verb, we got that. Okay, but now we want to word our ways in which the quantity and the quality, the quantity and the quality, the quantity and the quality are clearly expressed. So what do we mean by quantity? quantity? Well, it means like amount, right? But in this case, we're talking about the word, the sentence, the claim, right? Remember the term, okay? And are we talking about the term as a whole, like all of it? Or are we talking only part of it, some of it, right? The whole thing or part, okay? We call it, if we're talking about the whole, we call that universal. And if we're talking about only part of the whole, we call that particular. So universal and particular, this will all become a little bit more clear here in a second, right? Because in order to understand quantity, you also have to understand quality, which is either for yes or no, not, right? It's either saying what something is, affirming its nature, or saying what something is not, denying that it has some other nature, right? All claims have both a quantity and a quality. All claims have both a quantity and a quality. When we're referring to all of something, we call it universal. When we're referring to part of something, we call it particular. If we are saying something about what it is, we call that affirmative. If we say something about what it is not, that is negative. Okay, so all claims have a quantity and a quality. And that means that we can generate 4 possible types of claims. 4 types, right? We can have claims that are both universal and affirmative. These would have the word all in them, right? Okay. We can have claims that are universal and negative. So that would be none or no, right? Universal affirmative, all. Universal negative, no, none. We can also have claims that are particular affirmative. Not all, but some. And some are, because it's affirmative. We can also have a particular negative, right? Some are not, right? We can have some are, particular affirmative. Some are not, particular negative. So in this case, when I look at this claim, weapons of mass destruction are bad, I've got a couple of problems, and I want to kind of tighten this up. I want to word it better. I want to make it I want to have a more refined claim. So, the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to look at my predicate term. My predicate term. I need to make that a noun, okay? I need to make that a noun. Why? It's because, okay, our copular has to link like with like. If this is a noun, then this also needs to be a noun. That's what's going to make it stronger. It's just something that helps you refine it. So you might want to say the sun is shining. Well, that's true, right? But a more clearly, more accurately expressed, logically refined statement, a refined claim, the sun is an object that shines, right? Because now we have the noun sun, an object that shines, also a noun. So that copula really is linking, not just associating it, right? Okay, so we're going to turn that into a noun. The other thing that we're going to do is we want to word this claim so the quantity and quality are clearly expressed. When I say weapons of mass destruction are bad weapons, what exactly do I mean? If the quality is universal and affirmative, what I'm saying is that all weapons of mass destruction are bad weapons. That is the claim. But if the quantity is particular, then I'm not saying all weapons of mass destruction are bad weapons. I'm saying some weapons of mass destruction are bad weapons, right? Okay? So if I say it's a universal affirmative claims, all weapons of mass destruction are bad, that means yours, mine, them over there, that person's, right? Everybody's weapons of mass destruction are bad. But if I say, well, it's okay for us to have them, but not for those people over there to have them, or maybe those folks over there in that country, then it's cool if they have them, but if those folks over there get them, then that would be bad. Then what I mean is that some, not all, but some weapons of mass destruction are bad weapons, right? Okay? I might also say it's actually a posture, it's called nuclear Wilsonianism. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. Wilsonianism. The idea that if everybody had them, no one would mess with anybody. Kind of like an NRA, nuclear weapons don't kill people, people kill people. So if everybody had a 6-shooter, we'd all be safer. Well, if everybody had a nuclear weapon, we'd all be safer. Right? No weapons of mass destruction are bad weapons, right? If everybody has them, then everybody's afraid to use them and we're all safe, right? That claim could also be made. That would be a universal negative because it's referring to all of them in a negative sense. None. zero, nada, right? Okay, but I might be saying, hey, there are some weapons of mass destruction that are really bad, right? Okay, nuclear bombs and biological weapons, but what if we had a chemical weapon that just put everybody to sleep, right? Okay, now certainly some people would probably fall asleep in hot tubs and other people would, be driving cars or flying airplanes. I'm not saying it'd be a perfect weapon, right? But it would certainly keep more people alive than blowing up the city with a big giant fireball, right? So maybe we can have a weapon of mass destruction that is not a bad weapon. It might actually even be a good weapon. What about an EMP that would just shut down an entire city, but keep all of the people in it alive for the most part, right? Okay, so here, now I'm not saying here this does not mean that there are necessarily any good weapons. You can't necessarily infer that, right? But what we have here, okay, are four different types of propositions, right? Okay, we have the universal affirmative, all. We have the universal, or the particular affirmative, some. We have the universal negative, no. And we have the particular negative, some are not. And that is the four different types of propositions that you can have. That's the four different types of claims that you can put forward. And again, in the same way that claims have to have an is, an are, a was, a were, right? Okay, if it doesn't have one of those four verbs, it's wrong. It also needs to begin with the word all, no, or some. If it doesn't begin with the word all, no, or some, it's wrong. Okay, there you go. That's a really nice, neat way for you to always remember it. I do want to draw your attention to the case of the proper noun. And I used one earlier, or I use these as examples a lot of time, right? But proper nouns are special cases because they're a little bit counterintuitive. That is to say, they seem like one thing, but really they're another, right? Okay, so let's say I'm talking about Donald Trump. Let's say I want to say that he either is a good president or he is not a good president, right? Okay, well, because we're referring to a singular person, to one person, our inclination is to call that, right, a particular. So if I say Donald Trump is a good president, you would say that that is a particular affirmative. If I were to say Donald Trump is not a good president, then you would call that a particular negative. But you would be wrong. Proper nouns should be treated as universals. And the reason is because it really is referring to the totality of the class. In the same way that all cats refers to every single cat, Donald Trump refers to every single Donald Trump, right? And you may be like, no, another person could have that same name. Yes, that is entirely possible, right? But they are different people, even though they have the same name. It's like saying that, bear is the same thing as bear, like an animal and naked are the same. No, they're homophones. Donald Trump 1 and Donald Trump 2 are not the same person. They're homophonic names, right? Donald Trump is universal. It refers to the entire class. That class is just one entity, right? So Donald Trump is a good president would be Donald Trump, all Donald Trump is a good president. Donald Trump is not a good president would be better worded logically as no Donald Trump is a good president, right? Okay, so those would be how we express those terms. This is a special case. This is one of those things that you have to remember, right? Okay, so whenever you see a proper noun, you put that invisible all in front of it, and remember that proper nouns are always universal. So, to refresh and remind, if you are asked to put something and to refine it, right? If I put an argument in front of you and I text and I say, refine this argument, okay? And you go and express the claim, because that's your first step. That claim needs to have a copular verb. Is, was, are, were. It's got to be one of those four. You only have four choices. It also has to have a clearly identifiable quantity and quality. That means it's going to begin with all, some, ... are, no, some, ... are not. It's going to have one of those four forms. One of these four verbs, one of these four starting words and forms, right? If it doesn't have those, then it is wrong. Okay, that's a really important thing. And I know it seems really simple, and I'm just like belaboring, but this is something that students struggle with. But and it's because you don't think it's important. I'm not trying to be mean about it, but that really is the idea. You don't understand why this is important. To you, it feels like an unnecessary step, and so you want to skip the step and go on and do stuff that you think is more interesting, and then you end up lost, right? Let's talk about why this is important, okay? This actually being able to put any one proposition into 4 separate forms and plotting it into one of these 4 corners, right? This is something that we've been doing for literally thousands of years. It's called the square of opposition, and it's an ancient form of understanding logic. It goes all the way back to the ancient Greeks, the ancient Indians did it, right? Like, this is something that goes all the way back to the very beginnings of human civilization, of how to analyze and understand propositions. And it is the beginning basic tool of understanding and doing kind of logical work. And I'm going to show you a couple things, right? The square of opposition is important because it's the starting point of analysis. Once you can put a claim onto one of those 4 corners on the square, the universal affirmative, the universal negative, the particular affirmative, the particular negative, once you put it in one of those 4 corners, that's your first analytical move, right? You now know something about that argument that you did not know before. You can say things about it are true on the basis of where you put it. Let me show you, right? Okay, so we've got our 4 different points in the square of opposition. Universal affirmative, universal negative, we have our particular affirmative, and we have our particular negative. Okay, so the thing below, as we move down, that's called the subaltern, right? Okay, this is the particular that's related to this universal. And we know things, right? If we know that something is here, if we know that something is in this corner, that we're dealing with a claim that has to do with that, then we also know, right, that the subaltern has to also be true. Okay, so if it's true that all dogs are animals with fleas, it must also be true that any particular dog must be an animal with fleas. Because if the universal is true, its subaltern must also be true. We've now learned something that we didn't know before by using the square of opposition. I bet we can learn more, and you're right, we can. Right? Because it's not just true on the universal or on the affirmative side over here, it's also true on the particular side, right? Okay, if no dog is an animal with fleas, if fleas have ceased to exist, right, no dog has fleas, then any particular group of dogs, my neighbor's dogs, are also then not animals with fleas, because those animals are dogs, right? Okay, we've begun doing some analysis. We can figure things out on the basis of knowing where, in which of these 4 corners, we would put our proposition, right? So this is really, really interesting, and we've started the beginning stages of analysis. But we can learn more, right? Because a universal affirmative and a universal negative are what's called contraries, right? That is that they are the opposite of one another. They are contrary. And if one contrary is true, the other one must be false. They're disjunctive in their nature, right? So if one is true, the other one must be false. It's a fundamental violation of the law of non-contradiction for both of them to be true, right? It's also a fundamental law of the contradiction for both of them to be false, right? So, sorry, it's not, actually, right? Because we have our subcontraries. So it's possible that some dogs are animals with fleas, and it's possible that some dogs are not animals with fleas. Just because one of these is true does not necessarily mean the other one is true. Don't infer from this that because some are, it means that logically then some must not be, right? Because if all are, then some are. So if some are, we cannot infer that some are not. That's not how logic works, right? Okay, so if I locate something here, if I locate it in the particular affirmative square of opposition, right, if that's where I put that particular claim, if that's when I'm analyzing something, then I know if the author tries to go to the idea that because some are, then some must not be, right, then I know that that's not true. I can say that's a bad argument. Here's why. He's inferring something that can be inferred of universal claims, but cannot be inferred of particular claims. And the square of opposition is the tool that allows me to see that. It's the lens, it's the window, it's the framework that allows me to figure out what's going on here in a way that helps me understand it. Like contraries, contradictories, that is to say they're apart from one another at angles on the square of opposition. Contradictories, right? Okay, the universal particular and the universal the particular affirmative to the universal negative, right? And the universal affirmative to the particular negative. Those are what are called contradictories, right? And Two contradictory claims also cannot be both true at the same time. Like contrary claims, they are a direct violation of the law of non-contradiction. So we're figuring things out, right? Understanding where things go, properly wording claims and using the square of opposition to figure some things out is a starting point. That doesn't mean that in order to do analysis you have to do the starting of in order to do analysis you have to drag out the square of opposition every single time. It means that just by putting something into the form of a properly worded claim, you have already started doing analysis. You've already staked your claim about the argument, right? You've said, hey, of the 4 places I could put this particular argument, I think there, in this corner, is the one that best represents what's going on here. And by doing so, you've made choices about how you're going to interpret and using the square of opposition, though, isn't just the starting point, right, for doing logical analysis or argumentative analysis. Obviously, it's a great tool to begin that process. But that process is always going to involve reconstructing on some level the lines of reasoning, the lines of argument, the reasoning structure, the how they get from the evidence that they're offering to the claims that they're making, right? How do they link those things up? An understanding of logic and how logic works is really, really going to be helpful here. And if you don't word claims logically, if you don't use the right logical form, your ability to use and apply tools of formal logical analysis just simply fall apart, right? Okay, it's like, it's like you brought, standard wrenches to deal with metric bolts, right? Okay, you've got to have the right wording for your claims in order to apply your understanding of logical analysis. And even minor errors in claims help create problems with your analysis down the road. So that's really super important. Okay, I think that kind of covers a lot of what I wanted to talk about today. I hope you learned a lot about claims, about how they work, or at least learned more, right? So in addition to that subject term, copular verb, predicate term that I'm going to just be hammering away at all semester, you've now also learned quantity and quality. Thanks a lot, everybody, and I hope you learned a lot.